So what is up, guys? This is all you need up at the top up here. All this stuff down here is for a different type of game. So this is all we need to make combos in Dreams PS4. In the future, you might just be able to do this to mute rows, to pretty much use a keyframe and then toggle this on with the recording, but you cannot do that at the moment. Hopefully they will update that in the future because that'll make things even easier. So this is how you do it. Make sure that your timeline that has all the attacks in it, because all the attacks are within this one timeline right here. Make sure this starts off at once. That's very important. That's very important. What this keyframe does is it sets this to once. It sets this to once. It's also on keep changes. It's start combo and set timeline to once. That's what this keyframe does. It records that button after you click it. And it also turns off this signal manipulator. This signal manipulator, the left side of it is connected to the square button of our control sensor, which pretty much starts up the attack. So this is plugged in to the left side, and the right side is plugged into the A of a selector, It's also plugged into the power of the selector, and the selector is also set to pass through. With this selector, you can have different types of attacks, and I will talk about that at the end. Whenever I say different types of attacks, I mean if you were to hold up and press square, then you could have it move to the next output with a AND gate. And I'll explain that at the end because that's a little bit more advanced. So this right side of the signal manipulator is put into the left side of the A of the selector, and the right side of the A is put into that keyframe that switches this to once and powers off the signal manipulator that is single press. These are the settings for that signal manipulator. Pulse it on, 0 for both sides, no shaping, custom remapper. And essentially it's powered on in the beginning. Then what this keyframe does, or what this selector does, put the A that's on the right side of the selector into the power of the attack list, of the attack timeline that has all the animations within it that does the attacks. Have the speed however you want it. If you want fast animations, make sure this is faster. Let's go ahead and begin and show you guys what it looks like. Let me set this to this. So if I were to press square once, this is all that happened, but if I press it multiple times, we get more to the animation combo list. What you want to do is make sure that your character is completely animatable. What I mean is some characters, it's harder to animate, and then the animations will not completely finish, if that makes sense. So make sure that if you're using somebody else's prop, make sure that they have the connectors done properly to where it's really easy to animate and all the animations that you do will show. Let's get back to the timeline. This right here is all the animations for the sword slash. That's all this is. This right here is our kick. So you can organize everything. If you don't want everything scattered out within the whole list of attacks, which is this timeline, then you can put it inside of a separate timeline and then put it inside of the attack list timeline. Such as so, and then you can label it. There is a control sensor right here. What this control sensor does is makes it to where the timeline will play through to this attack right here if you press square. So you want to make sure that this control sensor is ahead of everything right here. That makes it to where if you don't press square in time, then it just stops the animation. What this keyframe does is turns off this on switch if you press square. It is on keep changes. So if this were to have stayed on and you didn't press square, that is what is resetting the timeline. This switch is connected to this keyframe, and it's also connected to reset timeline. This is what's resetting the timeline to the start, and it's also what is label switching it to sustain, so it won't loop over and over again whenever it does that. Again, this keyframe changes it from sustain to once, to where whenever you press square, it'll play through it again. And that's what this switch is connected to. Restart timeline and a keyframe that label switches to sustain, keep changes. This control sensor right here is set to remote. That way, whenever you press square, it turns on this keyframe that turns off this switch that makes it to where it resets the timeline. Once your animation is done and it's played through, there's a keyframe at the end that turns back on this right here, this signal manipulator that makes it to where you can press square. So if this would have stayed on, it's also at pole set on. If this would have stayed on, then you could just keep on pressing square over and over again, and you wouldn't be able to get through the timeline. That's why this keyframe right here turns it off. This keyframe is also at keep changes. And again, it also sets this to once. Again, the selector's A is connected to that, the power of the attack list, and it's also connected to that, the A on the right side, the keyframe that does all that. Square button is connected to the power of this keyframe that turns off that switch. And again, you want this ahead of all the stuff that's right here. Otherwise, it will not activate in time. That's why it's ahead. Now you can keep going with this. You can keep on adding attack moves to this. So it didn't have to end right here. You could just keep on doing it. In order to do that, all you have to do would be to repeat the process of this right here. And then you could add more moves to this attack chain. But you always want this right here at the end. You always want this keyframe that powers back on this signal manipulator at the end. And that should pretty much be it. Whenever it is put to once, if it finishes the timeline, then it will not repeat over and over again, if that makes sense. The only reason it's repeating over and over again is because this on switch is put into restart timeline, which makes it repeat over and over again unless it's set to sustain. What I believe that they might do in the future is make it to where you can record, let's say we were to have a keyframe, right? And we could record this with the keyframe. We can't do that right now, but that pretty much makes it to where it mutes the rows. Essentially what you could do is just use the keyframe and select all of these and then power them off, and that works too, but it's a lot easier to just do this to mute the rows. I don't know why you can't do that with the keyframe, but you cannot do that right now. You can't do it with the action recorder either. But I think if they did that, it'd be a whole... Well, it's already easy to do combos, but that would just make it even easier, if that makes sense. Just hope they update that. So, this is list 1. This is list 1. If we were to add an AND gate to all this... So here are our button combinations in unison with this AND gate. This AND gate is pretty much how we're doing button combinations. So if I press up and triangle or down and triangle, a result will be sent to turn on this selector and move it to next out port, which powers on our second phase of down triangle attacks or up triangle attacks. And that's essentially how you do it. Then you want to copy the method that we did here for the first row of attacks for A with this right here. What you also want to remember is that if you're using button combinations and stuff like that, you also want this to power off while this is animating. Just like this powers off while it's animating, and then at the end here, there's a keyframe that powers everything back on. You want to do exactly what you did for the first attacks with the second attacks. How this right here sets it to the timeline to sustain. It would set the new row of attacks to sustain also. And then this would set it to once, to where it will power back on the attacks. So everything that you did for this timeline, you want to do for your next attacks that are in the attack chain combo list for B. And essentially that is how you do it with my method. If you're confused about anything, let me know in the comment section below, and I will try my best to explain it through texts. Peace out, guys. Peace out, peace out, peace out. Make sure that this right here is possessible. I just have it on possessible, but you can have it on remote, but it's supposed to be on possessible and forced possession. And if you would like to see how I did the 2D game thing, you can check out my channel playlist if you want to learn how to do. This keyframe at the end here that powers back on your signal manipulator so you can press square to start up the timeline also powers back on this switch right here. This keyframe powers it off to where you can get to the next segment of the combo. And you can just literally repeat this process until you finish the combo chain. You can also just put the AND gate inside of here to where you can do button presses inside of the timeline that can activate different combos, and you can increase the row as you see fit. And you can do all sorts of things like that if you want to. But that's essentially it. Just don't forget that this keyframe powers this on, and this keyframe powers it off to where you can get to the next segment of the attack. Both should be on keep changes. This one's on keep changes, and this one's on keep changes. Because this one's on keep changes, that's why you need one at the end here that powers it back on. Otherwise, it would loop through it without you having to press square. Thank you guys so much for watching, and peace out.